So lastly, let's think about whether it's possible for markets to solve adverse selection, right? So governments will cover governments trying to solve this problem, and governments actually can do a decent job solving the adverse selection problem. In many ways, the trickier problem to solve is the moral hazard problem, which we'll get to next week, as well as the problem of implicit insurance, which is a whole nother problem in the U.S. But the adverse selection problem is relatively easy for governments to solve, and we'll cover that later. But are there free market solutions to this? There have been a few solutions to it, and they don't necessarily. So the first is called a lifetime, so market solutions. Market solutions to adverse selection, right? And so there are a few solutions. One is the lifetime insurance contract. Right, and so the idea behind the lifetime insurance contract is when we're all young, when we're 18, we don't know whether we're going to be healthy or not, right? And you might say, like, that's that, and there is some evidence of that, right? 18-year-olds don't have a great idea of how healthy they're going to be, right? Like, you might have someone who's a jock and an all-star athlete at 18 who by the time they're 40 has just let themselves go and is like 300 pounds, right? And so 18-year-olds don't have a great idea of what their health is going to be when they're 50, for instance. So what you do is you say, okay, the insurance contract I'm going to offer is life. You buy it for life, right? And you pay the same premium whether you're sick or healthy when you're old, right? And so because you don't know your own type, right? You don't know whether you're going to be robust or frail when you're young. When you're old, we can have that pooling equilibrium, where right, we're on the zero population line, and we're on the zero profit for the population line, and right. So the robust types suffer here, and the frail types benefit. But at 18, people don't know whether they're robust or frail yet, or they don't have a very good idea whether they're robust or frail yet. So if they're sufficiently risk averse, both robust and frail types may agree to this. There are a few problems with this. One is, and perhaps most importantly, you can't force people into lifetime contracts in many countries, including the US, right? This type of contract is probably not legal in the United States. If you say, okay, sign, like, this is a little dystopian, right? Sign this piece of paper when you're 18 and you can never get out of this contract even if you want to, right? So that's one problem, right? Where this is maybe not legal. The other problem is that this could breed resentment over time, right? So let's say there's two friends growing up, Peter and Tim. They both appear to be healthy. They're 18, right? They both buy lifetime insurance, right? And then when they get old, it turns out that Peter's really healthy and Tim is really sick. And so when they're 50, Tim has hypertension. He's getting heart attacks, right? He's using a ton of medical care, while Peter is really healthy for a 50-year-old guy, right? So the insurance company is still receiving the same premium for both customers, right? But it pays much more for Tim's checkup and prescriptions, right? This creates some incentive problems, right? The insurance company is going to try to dump Tim, right? Because they're losing money on him, right? So they're going to try to kick him off their payroll, or they're going to try to find a way to go back on their contract with him. Meanwhile, Peter is paying more in premiums than he's getting out of the contract. So he's going to try to get out of it, right? So even if this contract works in theory, the insurance company has the incentive to dump sick people when they're revealed to be sick when they get old, and healthy old people have an incentive to try to get out of the contract as well. And the contract probably, you probably can't legally have a contract that is binding when you're 80, you probably can't legally sign a contract when you're 18 that is still going to bind you when you're 80, right? That's just... That would probably be illegal in the U.S. This is right? So this is not very realistic. But what about the guaranteed renewable contract? Let's be a little more clever in how we design this, and instead of a lifetime, so this is a pretty bad idea. So what about the guaranteed renewable contract? So what is the guaranteed renewable contract? It's a very, very clever scheme, and it's probably my favorite of the potential market solutions to adverse selection. Still may not work, but I think this one's more plausible. And there are some contracts in the U.S. that do have that actually behave pretty similarly to this. So here's what we do, right? We still I offer a contract to everyone when they're young, right? This is, again, all these contracts, all these market solutions are based on the idea that when you're 18, you don't know whether you're robust or frail. Now, is that realistic? Probably not. So I'm going to be pretty blunt. I'm pretty skeptical about all these market solutions, but these are what economists are thinking about potential market solutions, right? But I think the idea that you have no idea what your health's going to be when you're old, when you're 18, I agree there's a lot more uncertainty. I will say for myself, my health is much better today than I thought it would be when I was 18. But there's still, right, you still have you can still have some idea of whether your health is going to be good or bad compared to the average person later in life when you're 18. But let's just take for now, let's take as a given that when you're 18, you don't know whether you're going to be robust or frail. So the idea is when you're young, we charge you. It's also a lifetime contract, but you don't need to. It's not binding, right? So it's binding on the insurance company, but not on the customer. Right, so the insurance company says to you, hey, Jill, I'm going to give you the following insurance contract. When you're young, I'm going to charge you really, really high premiums. And as you get older, the amount I'm going to charge you is going to fall and fall and fall and fall. Right? So it gets cheaper over time. So you're going to pay more when you're young and less when you're old. And so that way, right, so if I offer you this contract, right, what's the benefit of this? You are going to choose to stay in that contract when you're old, right? So with the lifetime insurance contract, right, when Peter is healthy and Tim is sick when they're 50, Peter tries to get out of his contract, right? In this case, Peter is paying really low premiums, right? He already paid the high premiums when he was young, so he doesn't want to try to ditch the contract, right? You still have the problem where the insurance company may try to ditch Tim, but the courts are much more willing to hold companies to long-term contracts than people. And so this legally makes a lot more sense, right? And Peter doesn't have a reason to defect, Tim doesn't have a reason to defect, the insurance company has a reason to defect, but we can actually legally bind them in a way you can't bind individuals, right? You can bind companies with contracts. You can make stricter contracts with companies than you can with people, right? It's right. That's so the guaranteed renewable, right? That could potentially work, like maybe, and there's some evidence that there are many life insurance contracts in the U.S. that do feature front-loading premiums that gradually decrease over time relative to mortality risks, right? So this type of contract, I don't think it would work for health insurance, but maybe it could work for some other types of insurance, like life insurance. Part of the reason, by the way, I'm skeptical about this contract working is it requires you to pay a lot for insurance when you're young. And people, at least in the U.S., when they're young, young means low income, right? Your income goes up, and it means low wealth, right? So when you're older, right, you earn more, right, because you move up the job ladder, right? You get promoted, you discover what you're better at, right? So your income rises as you get older, and in addition to that, as your income is rising, right? So you're also accumulating more stuff, right? You've been saving for longer, so you have more wealth, right? You have, and you're, by the way, if you're investing it cleverly, right? If you're investing in the S&P 500 or something, your wealth generates more wealth, right? So not only do you have wealth, your wealth generates additional income. So you're earning more labor income and you're earning investment income as you get older. If you're being clever about your investing, which you should be. You should know some basics about how to invest. It's worth taking a class on that, and figuring out what investments are going to pay off, especially in the long run. So as you get older, your income rises. So the problem, one of the problems I see with the guaranteed renewable contract is the premiums are high when you're young, which is also when you're poorest. So if you want to consumption smooth, which risk averse people want to consumption smooth, you don't want to pay really high premiums when you're young, right? You want to pay higher premiums when you're old and have the money to, or like in your 50s, right? When you're at the peak of your earnings potential, right? 50-year-olds are sort of at the height of their powers, right? In terms of earnings. So the other problem with the guaranteed renewable contract is it's sort of like it's charging you the most money when you are least able to pay it, right? When you're young, right? When you're young, you don't want to pay really high premiums because you're poor, and when you're rich, when you're old, you're also relatively rich, right? Your old self is rich if you've been at all responsible in your career and life choices. Your old self should be rich compared to your young self, and so your old self is going to be more willing to take, to pay more money for premiums. So that's another problem with the guaranteed renewable life contract, but might work for life insurance, for instance. I'm skeptical it would work for health insurance. So the last scheme is also clever, and it's a little wild. It's called the Cochrane Life Contract. Cochrane Lifetime Contract. Right, and so the idea behind the Cochrane Lifetime Contract is you offer, each insurer offers actuarially fair contracts. So they neither lose nor gain any money. Right, the insurer doesn't make any money on average, they're renegotiated yearly. Right, these contracts are going to cover health costs, and then also provide premium insurance, right? This is insurance against higher future premiums, right? So it's insurance against the odds you become frail, right? And so let's say a customer with a Cochrane lifetime contract is diagnosed with cancer. That means she becomes frail, right? Then she'll receive reimbursement for her immediate healthcare costs for that year, right? But she'll also receive a lump sum payment covering the higher premium she's going to have to pay in future years, right? Because they're like, oh, okay, you have cancer. We insured you against the medical bills now, but we also insured you against becoming someone who has cancer and having to pay those higher medical bills. So she gets a lump sum premium, right? She gets a lump sum payout that not only pays for her medical bills, but also pays for her future increased premiums. So next year she's going to have to pay more for insurance, but she can afford it because last year she got a huge payout because she's now someone who has cancer, right? So her medical bills were covered, but they also compensated her for the fact that next year her premiums are going to be higher, right? And so the idea, why is this a good thing, right? Why is this contract good? Well, the idea behind this contract is here. It's the insurance company doesn't have as much of an incentive to defect, right? So the insurance company, right? Let's say you become frail, right? You get cancer. Your insurance company says, "Great, okay, we only have you on our payroll for one more year, right? We renegotiate every year, so we pay you your lump sum, right? We pay you the lump sum." And then instead of having a lifetime to try to get out of the contract, we're only going to have maybe 6 months to get out of that contract, which is going to be really hard for us. And And so it makes it much harder for the insurance company to defect and decreases, right? Instead of being stuck with you because you got cancer, right? And the insurance company is stuck with you for the rest of your life, the insurance company can say, great, we fulfill our side of the contract, here's your deal, and now you can go contract with someone else. Or you can contract with us again, we'll just raise your premium, right? And so the idea behind the Cochrane plan is it's going, as opposed to the first two plans where you're with one insurance company for life and that insurance company could screw you over pretty badly if the insurance, like the first two plans, the lifetime insurance contract and the guaranteed renewable contract, in both those plans, the insurance company has an incentive to screw you over if you get cancer, right? Because if you get cancer at age 50, they're like, no, we don't want to deal with this guy anymore. The Cochrane lifetime contract doesn't have that problem. And lets you, and because once you get cancer, all of a sudden, right, they give you a lot of money, and then they're not your problem anymore, or you're not their problem anymore. So this sort of keeps the healthcare market open as it becomes more competitive. Now, in practice, this doesn't happen. My guess is it's pretty hard to tell how frail or how sick someone's going to be, right? And so my guess is insurance companies could cheat this pretty well, right? Like for instance, different cancers, like there's in real life there are different degrees of frailty and different degrees of robustness, and there's also the moral hazard side of this problem. So the moral hazard of the Cochrane lifetime contract is still going to be a major problem, even if the Cochrane lifetime contract in principle solves the insurance company. I think in practice this is probably too complicated to make work. I've never heard of this actually working out in the real world before. So basically, are there market solutions to adverse selection? Very clever economists who really want to make market solutions work to things have come up with some ideas that would make that in theory solve the adverse selection problem with health insurance. In practice, solving the adverse selection problem with health insurance requires government intervention, and we will cover that later. So that's everything on adverse selection. But before we go, I want to just sort of emphasize something about the Rothschild-Stiglitz model, where as undergrad economics majors, I know a lot of my friends did this when we were in undergrad. I was a goody two-shoes, and I never complained about anything any of my professors did ever. But my friends were like, what are we doing with these models? Why do we have this math? This is stupid. The Rothschild-Stiglitz model isn't realistic, right? What do we get out of the Rothschild-Stiglitz model, right? Well, for an economic model to be useful, it needs to give sharp predictions that are testable in the real world and useful in guiding policy. If an economic model doesn't give you predictions about how the world will work and isn't helpful in guiding policy, it's a useless model, and in my opinion, should be thrown away. It's just somebody playing with themselves and having fun thinking through a problem that has no bearing on the real world. And economics should have. It is a useful science because it has implications for the real world. So the Rothschild-Stiglitz model makes two predictions that are important for policy and are testable. The first is that no pooling equilibrium can exist, right? Robust individuals will never voluntarily sign up for the same contract as frail individuals in an insurance market, even if both types are risk averse, right? So insurance markets can pool risk among people with similar risk profiles. So if you and I are both robust, yep, we can totally contract with the insurance company, and we can we can share risk through the insurance company. But if I'm frail and you're robust, we can't share risk. That's not going to happen in a private market. That's one prediction. And so if you are going to if you're going to try to pool risk across people who have different risk profiles, right? If you want to share risk across the frail and robust types, you're going to need government intervention. And that, as far as we can tell, is true. Government intervention can force people to pool, and it does, and governments often do this, right? So that's one public policy. That's a prediction that no pooling equilibrium exists, which seems to be true. And there's also another prediction, or there's a public policy implication, which is it might be a good idea for governments to force people to pool, which governments do, right? That was the individual mandate in Obamacare, was forcing robust people to pool with frail people. And the second important prediction of the Rothschild-Stiglitz model is that if a separating equilibrium exists, frail individuals will be fully insured, but pay a higher premium per unit of coverage, right? So basically, if you're frail, you're going to be fully insured, but you're going to pay out the nose for it. It's going to be really expensive. While if you're robust, you'll be partially insured, but pay a lower premium appropriate to their health risk, right? So robust individuals are going to get cheaper contracts, but they're only going to be partially insured, right? And insurance companies will never offer bulk discounting, right? They will actually offer the opposite, where the more, in some things, right, you get a bulk discount for using more of it, right? Insurance companies will actually offer the opposite of a bulk discount, which is they will give you a better deal the less you use, right? The less healthcare you use, and the less insurance you buy from them, right? The insurance will be cheaper the less of it you buy. It will be cheaper per unit when you buy less of it, right? So that's the other testable prediction. So in the next chapter, we're going to test the empirical evidence of these two predictions in real world markets, right? And that's going to be really interesting, right? We're going to cover chain smoking teachers, terminal AIDS patients, frail college professors. We're going to look at evidence of adverse selection from a Medicaid experiment in Boston, which is fascinating, by the way. We're going to come to this experiment several times throughout the course, but it shows that people who aren't insured, at least in Boston, people who weren't insured in Boston were only willing to pay about 1/4 of the cost of their they were only willing to pay about 1/4 of the benefits they received from being insured, right? So that's interesting. Why aren't people insured? Well, they're only willing to pay about 1/4 of the they're only willing to pay for about 1/4 of the health services they receive when they are insured. That's weird. Why is that? We're going to cover that in future lectures. Not next lecture, but I think next week we'll get into that. If not that, certainly the week after that. But next we're going to go back to fun. We're going to go back to empirical evidence, right? This is going to be back to fun things. You're going to have slides. You're not going to need to read my handwriting. And we're all going to have a jolly old time. So I look forward to seeing you then.